Hey everybody, welcome to our second panel discussion. Again, we're going to be talking with three industry leaders, talking a little bit about some of that digital innovation that's around there. Okay, so today what we're going to be looking at, and we'll take you through a panel introduction, some questions, and then the next steps. So today we have three industry leaders here, and what I'm going to do is ask them to give a quick intro to themselves before we dive into the questions. Anthony, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Ned. My name's Anthony. I'm currently working at IWF. I've been there for a bit over a year, but I've been working on wealth tech in various forms for the better part of 15 to 20 years now. My passion is really about that end consumer and their financial well-being and how technology can start to make financial well-being more accessible for everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. Azrul?
Hi everyone. My name is Azrul from Jewel Digital. So Jewel Digital is a subsidiary of PNB, and specifically our role is to look to innovation for PNB, digital innovation to serve the customer, and PNB, for as you know, in Malaysia is one of the largest unit trust provider in Malaysia.
Great, thanks Azrul. And Ben, over to you.
Thanks. I'm Ben, work for Marcus today as a co-portfolio manager. Been there for around 3 years down here in Melbourne. We run a couple of SMAs, a growth and an income focusing on Australian equities. And we also have a daily newsletter that goes out to our members and investors that covers off all the ideas and strategy for the markets.
Cool, thank you. All righty. So let's dive into our first question there. So we're basically looking, and I think this is the central idea that we've been looking about. We all know that digital wealth is transforming how we interact with our customers. So let's look at the three questions we're going to go through. And the problem statement is really around how we look at advice. We know that digital engagement is increasing, and how we look at the different age groups and require hybrid solutions. So how do we stay relevant? So these are the three questions. Number one, what is the customers and what matters to them most? What are the strategies that you used? And we'll look at the solutions. So let's go through into the first question. And Anthony, maybe we'll start with you, because I know I've been following you through there on LinkedIn and know you have been commenting quite a bit. When you think about your customers, and IWF, it's interesting. It's maybe a 100-year-old company, but also you're tasked with making it digital and relevant. When we look at that, what's the number one thing your customers want and what matters to them most?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've got some pretty decent insight. Post the MLC acquisition, we've got around 2.5 million Australian super fund members. So we do speak to a broad variety of people on this topic. In terms of what they want, we don't necessarily start with technology. We start with what they're doing on their day-to-day lives. And really what people genuinely want is to feel secure and confident that their finances are going to be well managed today and tomorrow. And they want to know they can do it themselves. And they want to know that if they don't feel comfortable doing it themselves, they've got someone to speak to. And so when it comes to digital, the role to play is really how do you solve for those problems? Whether that be budgeting and cash flow management, all the way through to really sophisticated investment solutions that are automated or managed on your behalf by an advisor you trust.
And do you find, Anthony, just to follow on that, it doesn't start with technology, I agree, because it's not a customer says, I want tech. We all know that we need tech to solve it. But so has really, IWF has been taking care of customers for 100 years. How do you think about it? When a customer, do you go out and do customer surveys? Do you listen to what they say? How do you kind of try to solve that problem on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, and first, it's over 170 years. I think someone back in the head office would not be happy if I didn't correct you there. How do we think about it? We really start with evidence. So there's a lot of research, there's a lot of market research out there that talks about our population, the Australian population, in terms of their wants and needs, how sophisticated and comfortable they feel around their money, and the very specific issues that are on their mind on a day-to-day basis. So we start there, but then we also put that in the context of our members, and we do quite a number of surveys. And that's fine from a quantitative perspective, but we also like to get out there and listen to the voice of customers. So we do a lot of qualitative work as well, where we will video record people and ask them specific questions and take them through a conversation. You know, you pick up some of the gems when people use their own language and you can see the expressions on their face. It's far more human way to understand the problems that we're trying to solve.
Makes sense. And Azrul, in Malaysia, so PNB is one of the biggest kind of companies in the finance space in Malaysia. Again, you guys have a deep heritage there, but you're tasked with Jewel with the innovation part of it, right? To really try to understand that. How do you think about the customers and what they need?
I think Anthony said it, perfectly, which is what we notice the customer at the end of the day, they really want someone they can trust, be it in the digital or the offline or world. So when it comes to innovation, we are not just trying to bring in new technology. We are trying to transfer those trust from the established practice to kind of like a new practice and to a younger generation. So it's really about trying to bring in the trust to a new medium, so to speak.
And do you find from that perspective that you've been able to, is it like, I think people talk a lot about millennials, you know, I think there's this term, Henry's, high earners, not rich heirs, Gen Z, through. Trust is the same across all of it, right? Have you found with Jewel, you know, your task to basically try to figure out what is that next step of delivering trust in the digital? Is there any kind of insights that you found that were surprising to you from that perspective?
Well, the issue that we face is that generally our customer, the level of financial literacy, for example, is still relatively low in Malaysia in general. So when we are bringing the products, we're bringing when we're trying to transfer it to the digital world, we really have to keep things very simple. And even when we talked about the younger generation, relatively speaking, the simplest solution, the simpler way of doing things still wins at the end of the day. So if you ask me whether, how do we really, if we find any particular surprising fact about the younger, then what we found that is the same across the board, which is they really, really want something simpler. They really want access, and some of the younger one doesn't actually want, they don't really transfer the trust from their parents and the parent practice to them. So it's a completely different challenge to do that.
Yeah, like I think this idea that I know I've used this phrase a lot, but I think it's very relevant. Nobody wakes up and thinks, I want to buy a balanced equity portfolio today.
Exactly.
It's not a thing, yet we all need a balanced equity portfolio. That's the quandary, right? You got to trust it. It's got to be simple. You need the product, but you don't know you want. I mean, Ben, moving over to you from that, maybe you look at it, you're managing money from a different perspective. How do you think about that in terms of the customer?
Yeah. So going to be a little bit repetitive of Antony and Azrul here, but trust and transparency is our big one. And we think particularly, everywhere in the world, finance can have a bit of a bad reputation with trust, particularly. Here in Australia, we had the Royal Commission a couple of years ago into the banks, and it uncovered all sorts of skeletons in the closet. So our big thing and our whole brand is built on trust and transparency. And people want to be able to trust who they're giving their money to and who they're taking advice from, that they do have their best interests at heart. And so we're a smaller kind of player than the other guys we're talking about here. But so we're able to do that by being, really accessible and really honest. And the challenge and where digital comes in for us is really as we grow and being able to keep that, that touch of the clients as we get bigger.
It was an interesting part in Australia, the Royal Commission a couple of years ago. Like anything, right? When an industry kind of has some challenges, it changes. Like I was a financial advisor in London in the 90s, and I remember I joined a firm and I could see pretty much it was a product pushing environment, but that doesn't really work on digital, right? Like I think, maybe Ben, to ask you, do you think when we look back at what the Royal Commission did, in the long run, it's going to be a good thing for the industry? It's going to become more clear, more transparent. Long term, it's a good thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. while it did scare a few people with the findings, but the outcomes are definitely good. And we've seen lots of changes across funds management, financial planning that really do make it more transparent, and people need to know what they're getting themselves into. That some of those trailing commissions and just putting people into products for the sake of it doesn't exist anymore.
Great. So let's lead on. I think that leads on to the second question is, what are the actual strategies, right? So people who've been looking at this panel, the feedback we've got is like, okay, we understand the customer needs to go with a digital strategy. There is this kind of digital gap. How do we transfer it across? Maybe Azrul, we'll jump over to you first. I mean, your role at Jewel is in that innovation, right? And I say this with all the best respect. PNB is more of a legacy firm, right? It's one of the leading firms there, and it's understood that it needs to be able to jump across that digital gap. So what are the strategies that you're putting in place to use?
I think for PNB, one of the key strategies is really about building internal capabilities. And we noticed that for the longest time, there's a lot of reliance on vendors, on third-party providers. And we recognize that that's actually one of the fastest way that we can go to market with new solution, new products. But at the same time, because we can take a little bit of our own time, and I think the PNB especially recognize that, we can't just go in, not knowing what we are doing. So we need to take a bit of time, learning how to do this right. And that's why I think you notice being slow, understanding. So taking our time is not necessarily always a bad thing, because then we can really, really learn. And we really want to carry the trust, like I said just now. So the first thing our focus right now is really to build digital capability. It doesn't mean that we are building everything ourselves. No, not at all. It means that we really know what we are doing. I mean, at the surface level, even things like, I think, user testing, user workshop, trying to find out the user need at the basic level. These are not something that is that we do it regularly in the offline world, in the traditional world. And when we transfer to digital, then this capability from the marketing standpoint, from the product build standpoint, and from the user experience, understanding the user need standpoint. So we are trying to bring all of this capability in right now. So that's the primary focus. But having said that, I think over the years we've covered the baseline in terms of digital. We have actually covered quite a lot in terms of the baseline transaction model. For example, at the start of the pandemic last year, we immediately introduced like the digital withdrawal for PNB. And I mean, it's not something that we suddenly built. It's been built over the last many years, but it's just that maybe the capability is there, and it's just a matter of turning it on at the right time sometimes. So that's where our journey starts, really.
Yeah, and I think without a doubt, look, COVID has been challenging for the world, but as a digital firm, we've seen it at Bambu, right? I think 3 years ago, we were out there trying to tell people, you've got to go digital. And, it wasn't pushing water uphill, but it was, there was some challenges. Now we're almost can't keep up. People are like, oh, I need a robo today. I'm like, yeah, I can't deliver it like today. And like Antony, I know you've definitely put a lot of thought in this. We've talked about it. We've showed you some of the stuff that we're doing. Like, I think there used to be more of a gap between fintech and corporate, right? It was like, oh, they're different. But I think it is coming together now. Like, what are the right strategies? Like, a lot of the people who watch this panel are trying to say, okay, like, I know we need to do it. COVID's been clear. People want, but what are the actual strategies that like firms should implement if they want to close up this digital gap?
Well, I don't think there's any one particular strategy. You can kind of take two of a variety of options and they'll both be equally correct. It's about what's going to be right for you and the people that you want to have a conversation with. So I think Azrul was talking about this really simple approach to keep things nice and neat, make it very easy and accessible for the user. There's also this tension between simplicity and this kind of momentum behind the super apps, whether it be the SoFars and the M1s in the US. So do you want to be the one thing to everyone WeChat's obviously had a lot of success in Asia with that as well. Do you want to solve every problem, or do you want to solve one problem really well? And that's not necessarily something that you wed yourself to day one and forever, but you need to figure out what your identity is and stay true to that. But that has to be linked back to your purpose and the problems that you're trying to solve for your end customer. So I think strategy's got to start with who you're solving a problem for and what is the problem that you're actually solving. That's what you anchor everything back to.
I love that. I love that idea because you're right. Like sitting in Asia, there is this super app momentum, whether it's a Grab, it's a Gojek, obviously in China, a WeChat, etc. It solves everything. But maybe if we look at the US and there's a range of different, they're not super apps, SoFi or Robinhood, but they're solving individual, clear statements and problems from that perspective.
Yeah. If you look at what Wealthfront and Betterment are going down that same path, they're originally fairly what we call traditional robos, but they're also extending on top of that a lot of cash flow and debt management capabilities as well. And so I think what's happened is that the incumbents, when you describe that gap between fintechs and the institutions, these fintechs are starting to get maturity and credibility. And so I think that's really allowed or given institutions the right to kind of cast their gaze over some innovation, some forward thinking, rather than just protecting what they've already got.
Yeah, like I think certainly I was in E-Trade 20 years ago. It took us a huge amount of time for people to be comfortable to put money at an E-Trade because it was unknown 20 years ago. Whereas today we're seeing apps starting up and people are trusting them very quickly, right? You look at here in Singapore, Stashaway got to $1 billion very quickly. And now it's at relatively quickly. And now it can expand from there. I mean, Ben, it's an interesting point that Antony makes, like know what you're doing and do it well. Or there's just going to leap across to the super app. How do you think about those digital strategies?
Yeah, so from the fund perspective, we've got retail investors only. But unlike a financial planner, we don't have that one-on-one conversation to explain what we're doing, why we're doing it. And that's kind of the big gap that digital can fix for us. And we use our strategy sections in the newsletter. We have daily podcasts, weekly webinars that kind of give our investors a look under the hood and really understand what they're getting. And so it comes back to that transparency again, what they're getting, why we're doing it. And so even if they don't agree with it, they can at least understand this is why it's happening.
It's an interesting one. Just a comment on that. I can't remember. So you're actually showing the hood about managing money, right? You're not making it a black box. You're showing. I think it was either Monzo or Starling. They had the digital bank in the UK. They had an outage, so they basically went down for an hour, and they actually made public all of their logs for fixing. So they showed their ticket. Oh no, developer one didn't have this code fixed, and so they wanted to say to people, look, things break, but we can fix them. And there was I read a blog, there was some amazing uptake afterwards. People were like, oh, okay, you're human. Tech breaks, but you fixed it.
Exactly.
And they showed the log, and it was actually a real kind of powerful momentum for them. So Ben.
Yeah, that human.
Exactly. That's what you're seeing in terms of your newsletters and your content, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the human element. That's what people want. It's that touch without physically calling someone up and saying, hey, this is what we've done. Your money is being directed in this direction. They're able to log onto the website, just listen to the podcast, hear what moves we've made, and then also just hear what we're talking about, what's got our attention at the moment, what we think matters, what we think is, transitory.
And so, Antony, do you think the genie's out of the bottle? I.e., before a super app just an app couldn't go live because people were like, oh, customer acquisition was too hard, people wouldn't trust it. But whether it's Robinhood or SoFi or Betterment or Wealthfront or whatever, it seems like people can transfer that trust pretty quickly if the digital experience is simple and transparent. Do you think banks are now slightly on the back foot because trust in a great digital experience seems to be attainable?
Yeah, I'm not too sure if they're on the back foot. I think they're probably slower to the game than if they'd been given the chance to do it again, they would have entered. I still think going direct to market is difficult to acquire customers. It's expensive. You need to have a good runway. I mean, there's just no kind of doubts around that. But I think the disenfranchisement of the service offered by the incumbents has given people awareness that there's an alternative. I think there's enough proof points for people to feel a little bit more comfortable to try something new, to try something different. And one of the biggest factors around that is that it's often free. Well, free, you don't need to hand over a dollar for it. They might be selling your order flow, or they might be selling the data through social and kind of other sources. So, buyer beware on that behalf. But it's easier. I think the rising tide has floated all boats in terms of startups in the fintech space that are going direct to consumer. But you still got to get a lot of things right. I mean, some of the stuff that Ben said around be human, transparency, what happened in the UK. There's this kind of older trick around customer service, which is you almost deliberately get something wrong within the first couple of months of someone being a customer, so that you can fix it almost same day, because you actually get a better response and a better relationship with the customer by showing that you can fix things and establishing that trust. So I would hate to be a cynic and suggest that's what happened in the UK, but I know it has happened in the past.
Wow, you're look. However it happened, it worked, right? Because they got a lot of love and a lot of you're human, exactly. I mean, before we jump on to the next question, Azrul, in Malaysia, so clearly in some of the places, in Asia, and Gojek or Grab are moving in financial services, wealth front betterment, SoFis. In Malaysia, have the fintech startups been able to kind of bridge that gap directly B2C in Malaysia yet? Are you seeing it, or is it still, the kind of the bigger players, the legacy players like PNB are still dominating the space?
We actually see quite a lot of traction of the new player of the fintech. You'll talk about Stashaway, you'll talk about the couple other robos. And I think what's interesting also is that some of these robo, they do manage to capture a market that are outside of the traditional distributions of unit trust, typically in the big cities, in the wealthier area. And this robo managed to go all the way to the rural area, for example, all the way outside of the main city centers. And that was one of the more interesting finding to me, and that which shows that there is a demand that are not being met all this while, and that like you said, the barrier to this digital, the trust seems to be transferred a lot faster than the traditional big banks or institution might want to believe.
Is that the same in Australia, either Antony or Ben? Obviously maybe different geographically, but wealth is concentrated in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, in the main areas. But with digital, it doesn't really matter where you are. Are there pockets of wealth? Obviously, Australia is focused on the big cities, but do you see the same effect, that it's kind of spread out more because it's purely digital?
I would say that the lines of division are more around age demographics than they are around geographical location. I think when you look at places like Africa and India, where they haven't had great modernization of technology, mobile technology leapfrogged kind of web-based and bigger devices. So they had that opportunity, whereas because we've already had the web proliferated throughout our consumer engagement, everyone's kind of come along the same journey. But as generations come through and start to participate in the labour market, I think that's what's changing, or that's where we see different markets in our sector.
Yeah, makes sense. Ben, did you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I think Anthony's definitely right there. And I think the digital's kind of sped up the younger and demographics that are coming through, entering the workforce, about to enter the workforce even, into looking at investments and looking at how their money is going to be managed, how they're going to live in the future, rather than waiting till they are forced to look at their super when they get close to retirement age, which is probably the historical passage in Australia.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before. I have a 21-year-old daughter, and she got her first pay packet the other day because I've been trying to encourage her not to spend dad's money. And she said, so she had like $100 left over, and she just started saving it. And I said, "Oh, would you like to talk to somebody about that?" She's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Do you need some advice?" She's like, "I just clicked a button. I invested $100. And it seems like too easy. And she didn't do Robinhood. She just invested it in a small fund and it'll grow. But it felt super easy to her. And I think that was the magical piece. Because, I think we all know wealth has been complex. It is a complex business and we need to simplify it. So let's jump on to the third question. It seems similar to the second. We talked about strategies. but what actual solutions? So again, when we talk about solutions, technology is confusing. What do you actually use? I mean, Ben was talking about using content and webinars and stuff, but what actual solutions are you using here? And maybe Ben, we'll start with you. You mentioned some, but maybe to talk, because we do get a lot of people saying, okay, how do I do this? What's the solutions? What do I go out and do? Do I just launch a website? How do I do this? Any thoughts on that, Ben?
Yeah, so kind of coming back from what we were just talking about, it's all how you're presenting information, I think, from our point of view. So a couple of years ago, every piece of information, every piece of communication we wanted to put out to our members was either through an email or posted online on our website. Whereas nowadays we've got those webinars, podcasts, and we've also utilizing social media, and we've got discussion groups which allow members to ask us the questions directly because we monitor them, we'll answer them, and then also interact with each other. And so you might be, we have members that are in Perth and members in Melbourne, other sides of the country, but they can actually connect and talk about investments and talk about strategy, talk about products they like to use or don't like to use. And it just kind of increases the financial literacy and the investment literacy of all our members. And then it also helps them be able to utilize us better.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, look, certainly at Bambu, we've been doing that and we found it. There's a perception. So in finance, obviously, your members are able to talk with each other and ask you. In technology, people's perception of technology, clearly it has to work, but they have to kind of like it and trust it in the same way. And, if you put out more content, you become more accessible, they can find out more about you. We're finding that also. I mean, Azrul, working for PNB, as you say, you partner with fintechs, right? So you're using their technology, and whether, there's so much fintech technology out there, from blockchain to payments to trade finance to wealth tech. Obviously, we're focused on wealth tech. How do you, when you're at PNB and you're in an innovation lab at a large firm, when you look at all the solutions out there, it could be overwhelming, I'm sure. How do you decide what is a good solution or not?
That's a tricky question because like I said, there's a lot of things we can try, a lot of things that are promising, and is a lot of the solution are legitimately valid solution, and sometimes it can be very hard to differentiate between one with another. But I think again, for PNB specifically, is our part of our job is not only to look out what's the solution out there, but it's also to try to internalize some of this digital practice internally as well. So, for example, what we've in Genies been doing is to bring in terms of digital marketing, for example, right? All the concept about digital attribution, about how do we do digital consumer content tracking. We try to bring it into the into the internal practice. And the question around how do we differentiate all of this vendor, it is a difficult question. And right now, to be honest, for us, it's all about trying to absorb what's in the market. And when it comes to committing to any particular solution, and I think it comes down to trying to get policy. How do we fix this within the parents' company in terms of policy, in terms of their current practice. So that's always a challenge from innovation, like trying to push it into the bigger practice.
I think there was certainly a couple of years ago, there was a huge rush of innovation labs. Yeah. And you can see some of them work really well, some don't. And I know there's challenges because it's one of the people I know who ran an innovation lab, he described it this way. He worked for one of the biggest banks. He said, my job is to keep, and he described the bank as a container ship full of containers, and each container is full of money. And his job is to turn the ship quickly in another direction, but none of the containers must fall off. So quickly innovate, turn the ship, but none of the containers of money must fall off. He's like, it's a catch-22 to a degree, right?
True.
Antony, I mean, you've, again, looking at lots of different solutions, and there's so much out there. What would you say to people watching? Like, what have you found really works? What's useful? Maybe even what's not useful?
I think the biggest thing is there's not one thing that's going to solve the problem. we looked at lots of other industries and where there's been disruption and really strong dominance by new players. So you can look at the Netflixes and the Amazons, and really it's about personalization. So when you're thinking about what solution works, there isn't any one solution. And especially when it comes to content, you need to appreciate that everyone's at their own point in a journey of becoming familiar with wealth and wealth creation and investing. And so when we talk about everyone needs a balanced equities portfolio, well, as an industry, we've got hundreds of years to have come to that conclusion. But for someone who's just turned 21 and they've just gotten their first paycheck, well, how are they supposed to know that? And just telling them that, there's no connection between their own money and the way they're earning it and the way they're investing it. So you need to really start them off on wherever they are in terms of the level of sophistication and be able to grow with them. So I'd say personalization, but then the ability to actually support them and evolve with them and adapt throughout their evolution of sophistication.
And is that coming back to, like, we haven't really talked about data so much, but people seem a little reluctant, like I'm always happy to share what I watch on Netflix, but when you say to somebody, share about your money, people can be a little more reticent, but data is the key to personalization, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose it's about what data we think we're relying on. And how much data do you truly need to start to understand how someone feels about their money? There's a great study, I think it was done out of the University of Georgia, where they surveyed over 2,000 Australian consumers and got them to self-report how they felt about their own finances, and then compared that to their actual financial behaviours. And they realised that there was probably around 8 questions that if you had answers to, and they were multiple choice, you had a really good sense of what that person was like and how they felt about their money, from which you could then back solve a really nice solution, at least find a starting point to have a conversation that felt relevant to them. So I think that's really important, being relevant as opposed to having high velocity of content.
Yeah, like we've been doing a bit of work here called predictive planning, and we put out a survey to ask people about their money, and it was super interesting. But in part of our research, we found out that 44% of people in America live a cash flow negative life. Now, money in theory, like my co-founder Aki, based it on the game of Go, you have one piece and you can make a move. Money's the same in theory. You can either save it or spend it. I know it's more complex, but in reality, that's kind of it. Yeah, why is it so complex? Like, it is unbelievably complex. Like, we all find money hard and we understand why, and there's lots of reasons around that. But yeah, I think it's a good point. If you can't get the data, there's probably a number of questions that you could at least ask somebody to level set where they are in that wealth experience.
I mean, it's a perfect example. Asking someone about how much they save per month. I'm going backwards, not saving. That's all you need to know. Someone isn't saving anything each month. If they're spending more each month, that tells you everything you need to know about where that conversation needs to start, because until you fix that, talking about wealth and investing, it's very hard to have that conversation while someone's still dealing with the living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, there's this idea that spender to saver to investor. You can't take somebody from spender to investor, because if they're spending all their money, they have to learn to save. And so we actually have to create new savers and new investors to be able to do that, because you're right, you have to take them on that journey. So
for sure.
We'll put up on the take two summary, maybe just to summarize. Maybe Ben, let's start with you. How would you, as we wrap up in a minute or two, how would you summarize? Look, we've really been talking around this digital area. You've talked a lot about transparency, looking under the hood. It's surprising. Again, what we found out is, while everybody needs to go digital, every financial institution, most people are still very early stages, and they're looking for advice. They're looking for people to tell them who are on that journey, what should we do? So how would you, if you were talking to other financial institutions out there who are trying to kind of just up their digital game and understand their customers, how would you, what's kind of the best one minute takeaway you would give them?
I think it's all about just trial and error, and not thinking that you've had a great idea and so people will come to you and they'll mold themselves to fit your idea because you think it's great. If you don't get the results, then try something new. And try something new. It might be, like we talked about, podcasts, webinars, social media groups. Maybe that isn't it, and maybe there's a solution coming that we don't even know of now. But just being prepared to be agile and thinking on your feet and open to new ideas. I think is going to be a good way to let investors and let the public in.
Interestingly, that's a great point, Ben. When I started Bambu, we met a firm, I won't name them, one of the world's largest banks. They were being very brave. They said, we're going to launch a robo-advisor every month. And if the customers double month on month, we'll keep it in 3 months. And after 3 months, it doubles, we'll shut it. And they literally were launching like one every month. One for old people, one for young people, one for college students, one in this colors, one in that. And they literally said, if the users double month on month, we'll keep doing it. If they don't, and it seemed to work. Like, it seemed pretty reckless to do it, but they did it in small bits. So basically what you're saying, they assumed they didn't know what the answer was, and they just kept doubling at that. Antony, what's your 1 minute takeaway for everyone?
I go and have conversations with real people. We sit in this industry and there's this great feedback loop or echo chamber, but go and have a conversation with 20 different people from different industries of different age groups and just ask them how they feel about their money and what's important to them. You'll get so much out of that compared to a survey. Yeah, I definitely encourage that.
Yeah, I remember sitting in these fintech forums, people going, like 2 years ago when we had real conferences, and everyone was like, oh, robo's overdone. Everyone's got one. And I said, go out on the street, not in a fintech conference, and pump into somebody and say, hey, how's your robo-advisor working? They'd have no idea what you're talking about. So yeah, you're right. It's a good point. We probably listen to ourselves too much, right?
100%. Get out of that echo chamber for a bit.
Makes sense. Azrul, final thoughts? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I think Anthony and Ben already make a great point, which is once you interact with a customer and understanding what they want, and the second step, then the second step from Ben is necessary, which is you have to be brave to try out new solution, new offering, and a lot of companies perhaps are a bit too scared to disrupt themselves because they are protecting the existing source of profit, right? So and I think we are not going anywhere if we have that kind of thinking. So yeah, I'll take the best of Anthony and Ben's idea.
That's a good summary. That's a good way to do it. So cool. So look, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Antony. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Azrul. Look, I know you're all pretty passionate about this wealth tech world. I think we've got a long kind of journey. Not enough people are saving and investing. Not enough people are getting the right advice. There's no doubt that digital is the way forward. And yeah, thank you very much for the panel. We appreciate it.